Good morning, everyone. It is a beautiful Tuesday in the province of British Columbia, and you are watching the BC Poly Hot Stove, or listening to it later as an audio podcast in our iTunes feed, whatever floats your boat.
You've got options.
You've got options, exactly. We'll go anywhere. The kings of all media here. I'm Jordan Bateman. I am the Vice President of Communications for the Independent Contractors and Businesses Association, the mighty ICPA. I'm in Metrotown here in Burnaby, British Columbia, and I'm joined by...
I'm Maclean K, and I am the editor-in-chief of the mighty Orca, and I am coming to you live from the beautiful legislature, not yet crumbling, in the heart of beautiful Victoria, British Columbia.
There we go. Now, first, Maclean, I want to read a tweet from last week. Of course, at the Orca BC for Twitter, or at Maclean K, at Jordan Bateman, if you want to address us personally, and we haven't muted you. I haven't muted you. Please, if you're going to address me personally, at least be nice. Anyways. We have a tweet from at Trevor Forsanich, and I thought this was very funny, and then I got disconcerted. Here we go. He tweets, "Gosh, been hot under the collar listening to at Jordan Bateman for years, until this week. Discovering him at the Orca BC podcast, a redeeming pleasure. Everything he said, candy," and then a lollipop emoji.
I mean, I saw that too. The emojis are what kind of disturbed me, but at least he gave you a shot.
I don't. Have I changed? I'm worried. Like, am I softening in my old age? I don't feel like I've changed. I feel like I'm still ranting about the same things. But yeah, there you go. By the way, I did have to check with my kids. Like, candy and lollipop emojis. Is this good? Is this bad? They told me it was good.
Oh, well, that's good. See, I didn't know either. It's funny you should mention this because preview. Jody Vance's piece tomorrow on the Orca main page is sort of about this issue, not you specifically, but this growing tendency we have to see people's tweets and Facebook posts, and if they disagree with you, even if it's on something small, is to sort of categorize them as other or the enemy, and that is really damaging, actually. And so if this fellow Trevor, whom I don't know, but if he decided to listen or watch to our podcast and had already decided in his head that he didn't like you because you disagreed with him on, I don't know, something. And then, Jordan's not that bad a guy. It's perfectly okay to like somebody who you disagree with on, 1 point of policy or even 10 points of policy.
Very true. I mean, who wouldn't like me? Come on. No, that's
inconceivable.
Good. Jody's right. Like, we have to avoid the Americanization of our politics. Like, I don't freak out about the Americanization of things very often. The way they do politics is something we should be seeking to avoid, that's for sure.
I couldn't agree more.
Topic number one, speaking of polarizing figures, let's get right into it. Maclean, we taped last week on Wednesday. We thought, the session is winding down. We did the recap. I saw you did a guest shot with Off the Clough, with Rick Clough, winding down the session as well. And then bang, Thursday, all hell broke loose in the legislature. And who was at the center of the hellstorm? None other than Speaker Darryl Plecas. Maclean, you've been a member of the Legislative Press Gallery now for about a year. You've worked in the legislature for 5 or 6 years now?
Oh, since 2010.
Oh my God, 9 years. And yet you said you texted me and you're like, this is, I think, the craziest day I've ever seen.
You're right. Not only have I been in the legislature for 10 years, I did a year in the Parliament buildings in Ottawa, and that was the craziest thing I've ever seen in politics. The firestorm with Plecas, this amazingly hostile scrum he had with media, where he angrily denied calling Beverly McLaughlin stupid. Mary Polak's notes from an emergency meeting the night before, and then the BC Liberals, one by one, almost to a man and woman, reading the same statement. There was some variations saying they wanted to distance themselves from the speaker and wanted nothing to do with him in case he got sued. They accused him of violating their personal privileges as members and of holding the entire parliament in contempt, and then walking out. And so at the end of the day, when the lieutenant governor came in, there were exactly 4 BC Liberal MLAs on the opposition sides of the benches. I've never seen that before.
And Les Lane posited in his column that this is a Commonwealth record, 38 points of privilege. None of them will go anywhere. Speaker rules on himself, so there you go. But it was more than that. I mean, there were notes being passed during question period. There was all these press conferences throughout the day. Horgan, standing with Plecas, which I think is a risky maneuver. Like, you're really sticking out. Like you're really on shaky ground if you're wanting to stand with Plecas, given his behavior in recent days. The fact that the other people in the meeting with Mary Polak and Daryl Plecas, while they disagreed with the Liberals' stand on it, certainly didn't discredit her notes. There was no.
No, yeah, no, and in fact, I had heard a few of the NDP speaking with other members of the press gallery. So this is secondhand. I'll admit that right off the top. But they did not dispute, off the record, they did not dispute Mary Polak's characterization of that meeting. In other words, her notes were essentially verbatim and largely accurate. So, I mean, what happened in that meeting is probably safely in the realm of fact. And there may have been a hair of some details here and there where, Plecas or the other members might dispute the characterization, but overall, the 14 pages of Polak's notes are accurate. And if that's true, then it's disturbing, because those 14 pages are disturbing. We were joking in Polak and Wilkinson's Avail that it sounded like Nikita Khrushchev at the UN taking off his shoe and pounding it on the table, saying lies, 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 and threatening still mostly cleared Gary Lenz, saying, "I know how to make sure he doesn't get his job back." And there was revelations of a supposed suicide pact amongst the legislature police service guards. I mean, it's just. This is astonishing stuff. You see, I'm kind of at a loss for words. It's been 5 days, and that 48-hour stretch was literally just 48 hours of action in the worst possible way. And so it's impossible to summarize. Somebody asked me yesterday, who's only been sort of barely following the story, can you explain what's happened there in 5 minutes? And the only honest answer was no. I can't. If you want me to talk to you for an hour about what's been going on in the legislature, I can start right now. If you want me to condense that down into a minute, I don't think I can.
Yeah, I find the media narrative on this a little perplexing. So, I think the media narrative has settled around, the Liberals got to blow off some steam, and that was probably good for them, but really they hate Plecas so much that they can't possibly be correct in this because they hate Plecas so much. With a few notable exceptions. I think Rob Shaw is a little bit more skeptical, for example, on Plecas than the average press gallery denizen. But, I just come back to, he made, 14 or 16 serious allegations against James and Lenz, and McLaughlin found he was only right on 4 of them, all to do with James, and completely exonerating Lenz. Now you've got the interim sergeant at arms who's quit out of the blue. You've got, I think, his deputy quit as well.
He did, same day.
You have a clerk who, by all accounts, is respected by both sides of the House, with the notable exception apparently of Andy. May I call you Andy? Andrew Weaver.
Probably not.
She's leaving meetings in tears after being berated by Plecas and his right-hand guy, Alan Mullen. It is not good. There's talks of unionization among the legislative staff. I'm shocked that Horgan would just give this guy such a blank check, and at some point I think Plecas is on such a witch hunt that he's found a few evidence of fire, but there's so much smoke now that I think he's going to end up wearing a lot of this. And I think now, John Horgan's put himself in a position where it's not just Plecas wearing it, it's Horgan wearing it. Horgan skated by on a few things in this whole process, like the infamous wood splitter purchase, which McLaughlin cited as being, really legitimately stupid and bad, and it's one of the things. The wood splitter purchase didn't happen on the BC Liberals' watch. It was bought in the fall of 2017 when the NDP were in charge of the Premier's office. Now, are the NDP to blame for the wood splitter purchase? No, of course not. But just like the Liberals weren't to blame for the stupid purchases before that. I get it, but Horgan kind of skates through that, and the wood splitter kind of gets caught in this idea that the BC Liberals weren't minding the store. No, sir, that was on Horgan's watch, and on Plecas's watch, not on the former government's watch. So it's just all this is kind of muddling around, and you come to the point where you're like. Plecas, ferret out misspending, ferret out troublemaking and illegal expenses. I think we all agree that's great. But now it's become more like, it's not your job, solely your job just to investigate things. It is your job as well to actually manage the place, to represent all members, including the BC Liberal ones. I'm like you. How many words have you and I spoken and written about public policy in our lifetimes? Probably between the two of us, 3.5 million words on this. Like, we're both at a loss to explain what the heck is going on here.
Yeah, I mean, I want to just grab on two things that you mentioned there. One was about the wood splitter happening under the NDP watch and all the things that happened under BC Liberal watches. And I think one of the things that's emerged from everything that's come out is it's probably fair to say that collectively the MLAs had sort of been happy to trust people like the clerk to run the day-to-day affairs of the legislature, for better or worse. And, as far as they could tell, the lights were still on and there were no serious problems. And maybe they should have been looking a little deeper. But I mean, you could call that negligence, I suppose, but there was no, winking at corruption. They simply just didn't imagine that it was happening. And that is true of all MLAs who have been here. They just never suspected this stuff was happening. And so that's one thing. The other thing is you're talking about the media narrative. I did, I think it was CFAX radio on Thursday, where Professor Ron Sheffens, who I quite respect, came on the air and essentially said that this is the BC Liberals. They hate Plecas and they just want a distraction. And what I said to him was, you can think whatever you want about how the BC Liberals have performed in opposition, and I will listen. But that is a completely separate issue. All of these things that you just talked about, the Kate Ryan Lloyd, the deputy clerk, leaving a meeting in tears, midnight seizures and copying of hard drives, an allegation of a suicide pact among the police service here at the legislature. These things happened. And to suggest that they are somehow trivial or unimportant, or that we should look the other way because, yes, the speaker was right about Craig James. I mean, it's pretending, and it's also inevitably going to blow up in everyone's faces.
Yeah, I agree. And now, here we are. The members have all left the Assembly. Very few of them will darken the doors in the summer. I mean, a few of the Victoria ones, maybe, a few of the ones from around the province who may vacation on the island may swing in and check a few things. But, Daryl Plecas can come and go as he pleases, and he's still in charge. So, who's keeping an eye on this stuff? Who are the watchdogs that are making sure that he's behaving properly?
Well, he's made it quite clear that he thinks that he has the ultimate authority to do what he feels is necessary and or wants here in the legislature. If he wants to copy your hard drive, he can. If he wants to ensure that this person who the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court cleared in her investigation, which apparently was garbage and embarrassing, if he decides that he should never come back to work, then he can. I mean, that is part of the problem, is that the Speaker may have been right, and indeed was right, about the former clerk, committing misconduct. But he believes and has made it quite clear that he is the absolute and ultimate authority in this place. And at the very least, this is untested ground.
Yes. Yeah, no, you're right. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. I'm hoping that cooler heads prevail, and maybe, but I don't know. Plecas and Mullen seem to be all in on this stuff, and I guess we still have the special prosecutors floating out there. Something could come forward through there, and we're gleaning through some of Polak's notes that maybe that's more than what we know. Like, there's other things that maybe they're investigating, or that Plecas claims they should be investigating.
I kind of feel like there's a persistent divide between what's being investigated and what the Speaker has said should be investigated. The Speaker has talked about things like, previous party leadership contests that he wants to investigate, and it's like, no, that is simply not your job and not your jurisdiction, even if it was. I mean, so he has disputed again publicly what the McLaughlin looked into. So I mean, I guess what I'm saying is it's hard to say what's actually being investigated, because what Plecas and Mullen say they want investigated has not necessarily what has been investigated. Yeah.
Can you imagine investigating leadership races? He's going to seize PIN numbers. He's going to seize Mabel Elmore's stapler. Mabel, take your stapler home with you, for the love of God. Protect yourself. Ridiculous. All right. That is more than enough about Daryl Plecas. Let's shift gears to another Fraser Valley MLA. And, I live in Langley. I've known Rich Coleman for 23 years, since I was a young reporter at the Langley Advance, and he was a opposition MLA. I gotta say, that was in the late 90s, mid 90s. I gotta say, I did not expect to read this in Vaughn Palmer's column this morning. Love Vaughn Palmer, must read. Very much sets the narrative for a lot of things in this province. His piece this morning was like way out there. Essentially, he wrote saying that because Coleman went to a pro-life rally on the grounds of the legislature and frankly spoke more about end of life than beginning of life. And because he kind of went overboard in some rhetoric around the ALR depersoning people and compared it, unfortunately, to other historic events, that somehow he's out to sabotage, he's angry and bitter and out to sabotage Andrew Wilkinson, but Wilkinson's powerless to do anything to stop him because if he boots Coleman or demotes him, which you can't demote someone in opposition, it doesn't get any lower than opposition.
Yeah, you can give them a worse seat, and that's about it.
Yeah, he'll end up going over to the BC Conservative Party. This was, and to be fair to Vaughn, he very much made it clear in the final paragraph of his 600-word piece that this was pure speculation. Yeah, it was very pure speculation because I've known Coleman for so long, and there were so many points in this piece. I just shaking my head how did, even if he took Palmer's assertions at face value, how do you get to the idea that he's going to leave and join the BC Conservatives? This is the single most loyal BC Liberal soldier of the past 25 years.
Well, I think that's exactly it. I mean, I think Vaughn kind of conflated two different concerns. There's no question that Rich Coleman kind of had a bumpy last few weeks in the session here and was in the headlines for some reasons that he probably would rather not. But to suggest that, to say that Rich would join you could still call them fledgling BC Conservatives because I don't know of any.
Floundering. I prefer floundering.
They have a new leader, which is good for them. But this is I think you'd be just as likely to suggest that Coleman was going to join the NDP in cabinet, and I mean that, than to join the BC Conservatives. It's just not in the cards.
Yeah, it doesn't fit with anything we know about the man. So let's trace back, and I did a long tweet string on this. I don't need to go through all this. I feel like as a Langley guy, I need to explain a little bit about pro-life politics in Langley. In Langley is the hub. There's several organizations on the pro-life side headquartered in Langley. And the reason why is it's a big issue for a lot of the voters in Langley. And Maclean, I've been to many all-candidates meetings, federally and provincially. Not one has ever gone by without a voter looking the candidates in the eye and saying, I want to know where you stand. Are you pro-life or pro-choice? And each one of them has to give the answer. And in fact, it happened even at municipal campaigns. Really? Where there's no power. It happened in a few of those debates. But this is a key motivating issue for a vocal group in Langley. So we have that. Rich, no secret, is a Catholic. He's Catholic. He has certain faith perspectives when it comes to right to life. He's also a guy who in the past 10 or 15 years has watched a close family member, his sister, battle with dementia. And like a lot of us, has seen up close what that looks like as you head towards your end of life. And I think he had, I know, he and I have had long conversations. I don't think he and I have had more than one or two conversations ever about abortion, but we've had long conversations in recent years about how people with dementia or people in incredible physical pain, can they actually give consent to end their lives? How does that look and how does that work? And frankly, it's a conversation that, probably went on at the federal Liberal cabinet table when they were working through the national law on this. How, in a world where consent is so important, how do you give consent if you're in pain? Is that true consent? Or, if you can't remember yesterday or you can't remember last week, can you give consent to end your life? So, these are conversations and personal up-close experiences he's had. So he goes to this rally and, frankly, he's in opposition now. And I think he feels pretty liberated after 16 years being at cabinet table. 16 years at cabinet table, you have to have cabinet solidarity. The downside is you don't get to make decisions when you're in opposition, but the upside is you get the freedom to do stuff like this. The party has always said, we don't dictate to our guys on conscious issues. However, we do set the party policy. Thronis and Coleman go to that thing, which, the pro-life rally, I know there was a number of Langley people there because I saw it on Facebook, like it happens. He makes his comments and like, it's separate. Like, I think it's separate from like he was chafing against party policy on this. The guy sat at the cabinet table 16 years and no one lifted a finger on life issues in this province. Like no one went after abortion rights in this province for 16 years that he sat at the table as an influential cabinet minister. So all that kind of like mucks around. Then you go to the loyalty side. Here's a guy who stuck with Campbell in '96 after Campbell blew the flannel election. Like, he stuck with Campbell then. He gets into cabinet in '01 when they finally win. He essentially thought about running for leadership in 2011, was putting together a campaign, decided to drop out, endorsed Falcon. Falcon lost to Christy Clark. Rich Coleman, first guy there on the stage with Christy Clark. We're going to build around her, rebuild, help keep that coalition together. Was very key in those really ugly days between 2011 and the 2013 election. Was the quarterback the 2013 election campaign for Clark. When Darryl Plecas blew up the party after the 2017 election. He was very critical of Plecas for disloyalty, stood in there as interim leader to get them from Clark to Wilkinson. Like, loyalty is his number one value. And so, like, for me to sit here, like, to read, like, oh, he's going to go to the BC Conservative Party because, oh, he's, angry and bitter, or, Wilkinson might move him, a row behind in the benches. It just was so out of character for the guy I know.
Yeah, I mean, yes. It's a short way of saying yes. I just don't see Coleman doing anything other than he's either going to. There are two options for him in the upcoming election, whenever that is. He is either going to run for the BC Liberals in his seat, or he is going to not run for anyone. And I just don't see any other possibilities as really even worth discussing, because they're just not realistic from what I know of the man.
Yeah, and my sense is he probably won't run. I don't think he will run if I was to lay money, and that's the first time I've said that in 23 years of watching Rich Coleman. I think he feels like he's done his service and is looking at forward to other challenges. And there's a lot of BC Liberals in this boat, right? Linda Reid, Mike DeYoung, Shirley Bond. Yeah. These are people who have fought the good fight for a long time. In a lot of ways, they're lions in winter. The biggest battles are behind them. They know that. But all of those guys have earned the right to make their own call here. Like, yeah. They've earned the right to decide when they don't want to run again. And if voters don't like it, if they put their name on the ballot and decide to run again and voters don't like it in their riding, they'll vote them out. That's how the system works. But yeah, I just found that perplexing. And in a session where I've seen a lot of kind of perplexing narrative come out of some of the media, that was by far the strangest. Yeah. But maybe it's because I had the most personal experience.
It's not true of just BC Liberals either. Right? There are, we've talked about this issue before. Right? Yeah. This is an incredibly hard job. And I am a fan of when a politician says, I don't want to be away from my family, 5 nights a week anymore, that I think we should, listen, take more of them at their word. There are a lot of rumors swirling around, like Shane Simpson, for example, who is a cabinet minister in the NDP government, and there's a lot of talk that he may not run again. Why? Because it's exhausting, and he's been here for a long time. And I think every election there are always a few surprise people who don't run again, and the reasons are often not even public. Sometimes there are health challenges that we just don't know about, and sometimes it is just simple exhaustion. Yeah. And we're going to see some surprises, I think, among all three parties, the people that aren't running again.
Yeah, and I think, Carol James has been there since when, 05?
Yeah.
16 years. Farney was there in the 90s. You mentioned
and think about what you mentioned. Carol James
has been in and out since 04.
Yeah, think about what Carol James has gone through in her career here. I mean, she's contested, I think, 2-3 leaders elections as leader. She is still here despite a successful coup against her. Really, that was very shabbily and ugly, and at the time, shabbily handled and looked very ugly from the outside. And now she's the Minister of Finance, and has obviously recovered quite well. But the point I'm making is that she has gone through a lot in her career, and at one point, she will say, I think that's enough for me.
Yeah, no, exactly. Horgan and Dix worked there in the 90s. this idea that yes, okay, so yes, the NDP do have younger MLAs in a lot of seats than the BC Liberal side. That happens. Governments switching over. But the idea that all the old guys, all the tired old guys are on the BC Liberal side isn't necessarily true. And, frankly, it's kind of interesting to see how one party gets a free pass on that and the other one doesn't.
Well, yeah. I mean, I had, in conversation with Andrew Weaver earlier this year or late last year, he had floated the idea of introducing a term limits private members bill. And, this is the kind of thing you hear from new politicians from time to time because it sounds good. But, I mean, if you watch the NDP government on a day-to-day basis, the real sort of quarterback in the House is Mike Farnworth. And that is for a couple of reasons. A, he is respected by all three parties. He understands procedure backwards and forwards, having been in government and then opposition and now government again. And it's difficult to see who else would do that, especially one of the newer MLAs. This is either their first or second term. You need people like Mike Farnworth in your caucus. You need the voice of experience and reason and who can build bridges with the other two sides.
Yeah, no, exactly. All right. I also think that, frankly, political careers are going to shorten because of social media. I agree. The toll it takes is going to shorten up stuff. If you're looking to run for office, I think you should think about it as a 2-term commitment, tops. And certainly, if you're in any kind of major decision-making role, like premier or cabinet, you may not even make it those 2 full terms. It's going to be a lot. So, anyways,
I agree.
We can talk about that. We can have a long discussion about that someday this summer when I'll get a slow period. Okay, let's talk really quickly what the 3 main parties need to do this summer. What should the NDP be working on this summer, Maclean?
Well, I mean, I think they're going to work very hard on keeping their narrative about money laundering afloat. They've had some success in establishing that as a key issue that they have owned. But they're also going to have to play defense on a couple files. There are some very disappointed construction unions who didn't get the secret ballot, and also they're upset about the construction. They can't raid them every summer anymore either. So I mean, guys like Tom Sigurdsson, I'm not sure, are very happy. And of course, the big issue is they have to work out a deal with the BCTF, and it doesn't sound like the BCTF are going to give the NDP any hometown discount.
Yeah, no, that's interesting that the opening salvo from Carol James was to actually take away the language that that they fought in court to get. The optics on that are really shocking, but kudos to the NDP for at least realizing that what they won in court there is a huge expense to the provincial treasury.
Well, exactly. And the NDP know that they cannot go into the next election with a deficit. It simply cannot happen because it will confirm everyone's worst fears about them. You inherited the largest surplus in the history of this province and turned it into a deficit in 4 years. What will you do with the deficit you have now? So one of the shortest paths to ensuring the books stay balanced, especially as things like property tax revenue comes down, and as they even admit it will, they simply can't give massive deals to the public sector unions. It can't happen. It's too expensive.
Yep. What a world. Love it. All right. The BC Liberals, I'll start with this one. The BC Liberals' job 1 is to get Andrew Wilkinson out to as many parts of the province as possible. When he's there, he needs to talk to both the key members of his team in that riding. He needs to be identifying the people who can win that riding for the BC Liberals if it's not held by them or if it has an MLA who's likely to retire. And he needs to be increasing his profile with the public, which, frankly, getting more practice at being that kind of retail politician that you have to be nowadays in order to really sway the hearts and minds.
Well, I couldn't agree more. I think Wilkinson's biggest hurdle is the fact that a lot of British Columbians simply don't know him very well yet. And so if I was giving him advice, I would say, from the press gallery's point of view, have a quiet summer, but a very active summer in terms of getting out there exactly as you suggested into the ridings and meeting potential candidates and making sure that the people in places like Burnaby and Tri-Cities and Courtenay and Prince George know him very well.
Yeah, it's a thing Jason Kenney did. I mean, for 2.5 years, Kenney crisscrossed Alberta in a blue pickup truck. Obviously, that doesn't fit with the kind of guy that, Wilkinson is. But, there is a path there, an explanation there. And I mean, Kenney was a known quantity, and he still went to every nook and cranny of that province several times. in his blue pickup truck, and it just became, you're having a community event. Well, of course Jason Kenney's going to be there. What else is he doing? There's the pickup truck right over there. That's something that Wilkinson needs to take a peek at. You also sent a note over in our show notes that the Liberals need to tell their story, which I think is a good way of putting it.
Well, that's it. I mean, people understand what the government is for because they're out there doing these things. But the BC Liberals need to talk about tax hikes under the NDP. They need to talk about the economy. They need to talk about their plans, and they need to talk about the waste of time and money that if the NDP decide to fight Trans Mountain, take it all the way to the Supreme Court, even though they lost a pretty decisive and comprehensive decision at the Court of Appeal here. I mean, they need to highlight some of the things the NDP shouldn't be doing, as well as talking about the stuff they would do. Because the NDP have, as any government has stubbed their toe on more than one occasion. And occasionally, those of us in the media have kind of let them get away with it. And so the BC Liberals need to be the ones to say, yeah, they did this, they did this, they did this. And none of those things are helping you.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. They also need to collect stories. So they need to hear from the people in those ridings and use them, because that is powerful. It's powerful in question period and powerful with the press gallery. I think of the day when they brought in those landowners or those cabin owners from Anmore and Belcarra. That was a good day for the BC Liberals in question period and with the provincial press, because they were able to put faces to the issue rather than it being about zillionaire cottage owners. It was about families who had inherited this little ramshackle piece of property and just happened to be dinged by this tax. So more of that, finding those stories, starting to cultivate those people to come in the fall and throw the NDP off their game. And then we have Andrew Weaver and the Greens. You have quite the innovative strategy for the Greens, Maclean.
Yeah, if I am Andrew Weaver, Adam Olsen, and Sonia Verst now over the summer, I forget that provincial politics exists, because your number one priority now is the federal election, and there is this narrative taking hold that there is a bit of a green surge. Now, I am skeptical that this is going to happen on the federal scene, but I also think that the Greens kind of need it to happen. They need to, at the very least, expand beyond the 2 seats they have on Vancouver Island. And so if I'm the Greens, I throw every ounce of every spare minute I have into identifying a couple of ridings in BC where a federal Green candidate might have a realistic shot, and then spending a lot of time there. Because if the one thing that'll help the Greens the most provincially, because I think they are going to be in trouble differentiating themselves from the NDP come the provincial election, is they have to sort of sustain this kind of perceived Green wave. They have to continue to be seen as a viable option to vote for. It's not a protest vote. It's not a place you park your vote if you can't make up your mind. They have to be seen as a real, hey, these guys could actually run the province. And I think the best way for them to accomplish that is to get more Greens elected federally. They need company, in other words. Yeah,
they need company, and with that, they need to build their machine, the Green machine, right? And that's the big problem with the Greens is they're piss poor at the actual campaign mechanics. I mean, I don't think for a second that even Andrew Weaver has a list of his supporters in his riding. I think honestly he has no idea who comes out and votes for him. Election to election. I don't think he does. They're doing much voter ID. They need to build those mechanics out, because that's how you win in close fights. And the Greens, if they're going to be a political force for a long time, they need to build that machine underneath that can compete with the NDP unions and the Liberals.
Yeah, I think the provincial Greens have done a better job than the federal Greens in that. The federal Greens have been guilty of being the Elizabeth May party for a little too long. I mean, they got 4% of the vote in the last federal election. I mean, that is just a fact. And that is, even if you double that doesn't necessarily mean you get even a single extra seat. And so I think they kind of have to handhold the federal Greens this a little longer. I also think it's inevitable that eventually someone's going to crack down on all the third-party support the Greens get. That the groups like the Dogwood Initiative aren't going to be free to just campaign for whoever they want for much longer. That's not a comment on the Dogwood Initiative. I just think that's where we're heading. And so the Greens have kind of coasted with some of that support, and I think that's going to come to an end sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I agree. All right, well, it'll be an interesting summer. It's going to be a good one. We will keep an eye on it all. You can follow The Orca at The Orca BC on Twitter, facebook.com/The Orca BC. He's at Maclean K. I'm at Jordan Bateman. We'll reconvene in a week. Thanks for watching.
Thank you.